Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Navis Nobilite. I am Captain Zelnick, and I am starting the ship overviews for the Space Marines. And today I'm going to start with a little bit of a curveball, because in order to talk about the Fortress Monistary, I have to talk about the Ramilies Starfort. Because you can take a Fortress Monastery in a standard game, even if it's a defense, I have to explain the the Ramillies Starfort, because they use many of the same rules. So this is going to be a bit of a two-for video for those who enjoy either Chaos or Imperial, to know a little bit more about some of your defensive options for some of your missions. Also, the Ramillies is just a gorgeous miniature, though it is an absolute pain in the behind in order to assemble. There are alternatives made by Soulforge Studios. I highly recommend them. So let's get to it. First things first, the Ramillies Starfort is 875 points. It is a quadrant-based ship, which means all four of its quadrants have these stats. So each quadrant has defense 12. That's right. Every quadrant is a battleship. No speed, no turns. Shields 4 per quadrant. Armor 5 up, and turrets 4 per quadrant. Its quadrant weapons are weapons battery 60 centimeters, strength 12, the firing arc out of that quadrant. The lance battery, strength 5, 60 centimeters out of that quadrant, and a strength 4 launch bay for fighters and bombers. It has a basilica weapon, which is the main structure in the center. It is a 45 centimeter strength 4 weapons battery and a strength 9 torpedo salvo, both of which fire all around. What a wonderful defense. Very defendable, very durable, very lovely. Okay, deployment and scenarios. It can be deployed as an orbital defense or in appropriate scenarios such as planetary assault, exterminata, surprise attack, or hunter-prey as a replacement for a planet. In such scenarios, orbital defenses may be sited within 30 centimeters of the Ramillies Starfort. A Ramillies is bought from the fleet's points rather than defenses to represent the rarity and its importance. Ramillies may only be used by prior agreement in competitive games. It's unlikely to be ambushing you in the middle of a fleet engagement after all, but it can prove to be a good surprising find for players in umpired scenarios. Now, there are a number of important rules regarding the Ramillies Starfort, and let's go over them. First thing first, it's based on quadrants. Those quadrants have the established stats that are stated here. You can destroy individual quadrants as normal, but when it is fired upon, determine which quadrant is being fired on by tracing a straight line from the stem of the firing ship to the center of the fort. Seems pretty obvious when considered. You cannot target the basilica, to be specific. Likewise, when ordnance hits, it will be hitting resolved against the quadrant of the fort it moves in from. So basically, if you move torpedoes in, it hits it in that arc. No surprises there. Now, Nova Cannons and Armageddon guns can score a full D6 hits only against the quadrant, under the center hull of the marker when it hits. So bear that in mind. Damage and criticals. All damage and criticals only affect the quadrant that they are inflicted against unless specifically noted otherwise. Quadrants are crippled individually, and once they are reduced to 6 damage points, once a quadrant is reduced to 0, any further hits plow into drifting wreckage and do no further damage. Treat that quadrant of the base as an asteroid field from now on, which means you can't shoot through it. This effect cannot damage the other quadrants and thus remains unchanged if the owning pair elected to rotate the station at the start of the game. Ramming. When ramming a Ramillies, you can only ram a quadrant you first contact if a ship happens to make contact right at the junction between two quadrants as measured by the model's base, not by the model itself. The ramming player may pick which of the two adjacent quadrants to ram. Hit and runs. Hit and run are likewise resolved only against the quadrant that they are directed at and will not affect other quadrants. Boarding. Ramillies cannot be boarded by ships. Plain and simple, whole regiments would be needed. The only vessel that may attempt to board a Ramillies is a Space Hulk, and only a Space Hulk that has a sufficient number of troops. If doing so, the remaining hit points of all 4 quadrants apply to the Ramillies boarding value. All 4 quadrants apply, but only the turret value of the quadrant actually being boarded is added to the value. Resulting hits and critical damage only apply to the quadrant. The Ramillies can always board an enemy ship's base contact with it, in the end phase of its own turn, and it can decide how many quadrants are involved in the boarding action. Now, damage control is also done individually. All 4 quadrants constitute their own ships, and as if they were placed back to back. The fort itself is only destroyed once all 4 quadrants are reduced to 0 points, and then roll on the catastrophic damage table for the Ramilies. Massing turrets. Various quadrants of the Ramillies Star Fort automatically count as massing turrets. Unless crippled or destroyed, follow all normal rules for massing turrets. However, only the quadrants adjacent can mass turrets, so the ones directly next to the quadrant that are being attacked. Given the maximum, to a total maximum of +2 turrets in massing turrets. This is in addition to any ships that may be in base contact, though the maximum restriction of no more than 3+ turrets still applies. Rotating. Before the game starts, the owning player can decide if the Ramillies will rotate or not. Once the decision is made, it cannot be changed throughout the game. If it is decided that it will rotate, it does so for 45 centimeters once per game turn, no more or less. At the beginning of the owning player's movement phase, if it rotates, it will always rotate in the same direction. The Ramillies otherwise does not move in any way during the course of the game. It still counts as a defense, and the movement does not alter, nor can it be altered by any command checks or special orders. It simply keeps on turning. You spin me right round, baby, right round, like a record, baby, right round, round, round. If the owning player decides the Ramillies will rotate, it cannot have ships and dock with it for the duration of the game. Blast markers not removed remain in place when the Ramillies rotates and affect whatever quadrant they are in contact with. So bear that in mind. Ordnance. The Ramilies Star Fort may have in play up to twice the number of attack craft of its normal launch bays, so it can just keep on launching. Each quadrant has its own shields. When a blast marker is placed on it, it is applied to the appropriate quadrant. Although they are essentially in contact with each other, the blast markers placed between the quadrants taking fire on the quadrant closest line of fire. So basically, even if you shoot at it, it's not going to knock down the shields of the other quadrants, unlike if there were any other ships base to base with a ship being shot at. Bear that in mind. In the end phase, in the end phase, D6 blast markers are removed from the whole of the Ramillies fort, not per quadrant. Docking. Friendly ships in contact with the Ramillies fort can halt their movement just as they were in a gravity well. If they wish to turn, they may use burn retro special orders without taking a command check to do so. If a ship is in contact with one of the 4 inter-quadrant docking piers, it can fully dock. While fully docked, it gains an extra 4 dice when rolling for damage control, and if it remains docked for 2 full turns, and was not braced, it is considered to automatically have reloaded. Ordnance, no command check required. Even while fully docked, the ship can be still targeted and attacked separately from the fort, although it counts as being in close formation with the fort for mass turret fire and the benefits and dangers it brings. Special orders. Unlike most defenses, the command, control, and communications of the Ramillies is superior to that even of a warship. To represent this, the Ramillies can use the following orders: reload ordnance, lock on, and brace for impact. Ramillies are also typically manned by experienced personnel, so their leadership is rolled for as a capital ship. Ramillies also has a single command check reroll, which it may be used when it attempts for special orders. Fleet commanders may be placed aboard the Ramillies, in which case their own leadership value is used by the fort, and the fort's reroll is added to the commander's own rerolls that can be used throughout the fleet. That is a wonderful little addition. Split orders. The internal communication to the Ramillies meant different quadrants can use different special orders, so bear that in mind. Each quadrant has to roll individually, but it uses the commander's leadership. So, Ramillies can purchase special torpedoes. However, Basilica takes critical damage while armed with torpedoes. Sorry, let me read this. Both the damage effects from the table and the resulting and from the torpedo special rules apply, so be warned if you decide to take vortex torpedoes on this sucker. Okay, critical hits. Ramillies Star Forts have a unique critical hits table, and they have a unique catastrophic damage table. So, here is the critical hits table. If I'm going to let you simply read this if you want to pause the video to get an idea of what happens and what in that regard. It also has a unique catastrophic damage table. So if you want to pause and read this, by all means do so. I'm not going to go through all of this information because we have to get onto the Fortress Monistary now. Okay. Let me get back to... Uh, Give me just a few moments. Here we go. Fortress Monistary for the Space Marines. So the Fortress Monistary is significantly more expensive than the Ramilies Starfort, but it utilizes the vast majority of all of the rules that we just described. Now, what does it have? Defense 12 per quadrant, just like the Ramilies. Speed 0 centimeters, turn 0. Shields 4 per quadrant. Armor 6 plus. Right there, you already see a massive benefit. Right there. Turrets 4. What do the quadrants have? A significantly better weapons battery at strength 18 at 60 centimeters. A lance battery, somewhat weaker at strength 3 at 45. And each of them has a Thunderhawk launch bay for 3 squadrons. Weapons battery, 60 centimeters on the Basilica at strength 8, significantly better than the Ramillies Starfort, and it has the torpedo salvo. Now, it follows all of the same rules for the Ramillies Starfort. Now, why am I bringing this up? Normally, I don't go over defenses because they're mostly used in campaigns or non-fleet based scenarios. Well, the answer is one of the Space Marine fleets allows you to take this in a standard fleet list. So bear that in mind. This is far more of a giant middle finger to your opponent because these things are monstrously huge and enormously difficult to fight. They're very, very tough and enormously powerful. So basically, for the use of the one fleet that it's used for, it's basically a massive troll against your opponent if you want to make their day more interesting. Now, of course, because it does follow the rules of the Ramillies Starfort, you will have to talk with your opponent explaining why in the world is a Fortress Monistary in the middle of a fleet engagement. But because it is standard in the actual fleet list as an option, it is legal for play. So bear that in mind. Now, your opponent may just say, no, I'm not dealing with that crap. And, for the sake of a good game, you might as well not. But I have never met somebody who took a look at a Fortress Monistary and the opportunity to fight one and said no. So let's all bear in mind, Space Marines do have some nice toys in Battlefleet Gothic, and the Fortress Monistary is definitely one of them. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon.